All right. Welcome back, fellow spellbreakers. We have a legendary guest on the show today. By divine intervention, what have you, we're able to make it work. Yeah, he's a man, a legend who needs no introduction, but we will give one out of respect. We have the legendary Christopher J. Smith of Fulfilled Living. Christopher J. Smith in 2008 was freed from the bondage of the unfulfilled state that is created by the personal interference of information pushed upon us by the matrix system and its architects. Since that time, his body's been operating in its natural fulfilled state, and we would love to get into what fulfilled living means today. Christopher is a very inspiring philosopher, I would say spiritual teacher, as well as author of the legendary book, The Secret Self, A Practical Guide to Spiritual Awakening and Inner Freedom, that is available on Amazon and I think on his website as well. But without further ado, Christopher, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you, Donny. Good to be with you, my friend. Very happy to be here. Yes, I'm well. I'm good.
Nice. And wow, so Christopher, where to begin today? I'm just totally blown away by your content and your perspectives on everything. So maybe we could start with a little bit of an origin story of, take us back to 2008. What was your process like to, let's call it, wake up to this concept of the fulfilled state? Maybe you could walk people through, what your process was like and what fulfilled living means to you.
I'll do my best. So, I guess around 2006 sort of time, I became aware more of you could say, the corruption and things in the world. And to realize that obviously things are not the way that we thought that they are, or at least the way that I thought that they were. But I'd always had this suspicion, this sense that something was not quite right. And so when I came upon certain information, just I'd come out of the army, the British Army, I came upon some information and it led to one thing and to the next thing and to the next thing, as it tends to do. And it opened up this whole, Pandora's box of seeing the world and society in a completely different way. And at first, there was a sense of despair with it, a sense of hopelessness with it. Maybe even before that, a sense of fascination, but then it turned into a sense of hopelessness in the sense that it felt as though nothing could be done, nothing could be changed. It seemed as though the world was heading in a certain direction, and there was, no way of being able to change that. And the direction that I saw things heading in, based on the information that I came across, was that the whole planet really was going to be kind of monopolized by, I guess, certain forces that certainly don't have humanity's best interests at heart. And so that was quite a shift in itself. I call this like a geopolitical shift, which I'm sure many of us have. And what I came to really see and realize was you cannot really change the outer. The only thing you can really change or transform is the inner. And once I saw that, then I focused on the inner. And then around sort of 2008 time, that's when I had this, I guess, one of the most sort of pivotal sort of shifts that took place. I was sat in a churchyard and I was looking at a tree And what came to mind was, if you're looking at a tree, you don't see the tree because you only see your information, all of your knowledge, all of your past about the tree. So you can't see what actually is in front of you. And something in that moment made sense, something clicked when I realized that when that thought came to the mind, it kind of disarmed all of my thoughts, all of the mind, and there was a cessation of thinking, a cessation of all thought, a cessation of all past. And in that moment, it was like seeing the so-called tree as if for the first time, beyond any information or idea of tree, beyond the concept, even, or the word tree itself. And it was like seeing it for the first time. It was so bright, it was so vivid. And also, it didn't stand alone by itself. It didn't stand separately. I saw that it was connected to everything, one with everything. And this went on for some time. I don't know how long. Time seemed to just fall away at that point. And then I had another strong thought that came, which was, where are you? Can you find where you are? Because in that moment, it was like everything was panoramically seen to be one. And it is like I'd lost myself in that moment. So when I look back towards to see where I was, where am I? I could not find myself. And this was actually a very, very blissful realization or shift that took place. There was no longer the burden of a self there. There was like just complete open spaciousness. And in not being able to find myself and in seeing that everything was just simply this one non-dual uh, life, intelligent state, this sense of self was never the same again. It never came back. Somehow having that realization, seeing that was enough to just wipe it out. This whole idea of a self, this whole sense of a self. So that was the main pivotal shift that took place in 2008. And ever since that point, it has seemed to have deepened and deepened and deepened. And then these two things have kind of become intertwined together to be seen within my experience as not being different than each other in terms of what seems to be going on outside and what seems to be going on inside, because I saw really there is no inside or no outside. It is like a kind of mirror reflection almost, what we call life or reality. So yes. So I don't know if that explains that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I found that story fascinating. Thank you for sharing it. A few things come to mind. One is this concept of practicing presence. Um, and you described this kind of almost timeless state or dimension. And I myself have experienced that. It seems like the false mind or the false self, which you speak about, which I want to get into in a little bit, keeps us perpetually either obsessed with past or focused on future. And that seems for me to be the main trap by which we are enslaved, either by ourselves, by archons, by demons, whatever we want to call them. It's this, focus on future or past. But when we really dial into the fact that the present moment is all that exists, there's like this endless depth of presence when, like time almost stops. So I found that very fascinating. And it's more interesting, that even back in 2006, 2008, you were kind of achieving these states of consciousness. Do you think there was do you think the fact that you were, finding out about kind of the bad things going on in the world that you had highlighted, do you think that was the catalyst for you to kind of break through that veil of the false self? Or like, do you think those were related events, that it was necessary for you to kind of see the bad things happening in the world for you to get that state? Or
I think for sure we can say that everything is you mentioned the present moment. Everything is a continuation in the present moment. So there is a kind of chain effect of this cause and effect relationship. But what I also must say is that the very fundamental level of our being, it is not subject to cause or effect. Ultimately, it is not caused, and also it cannot be affected. But on the seeming surface level, which includes the body, the mind, and the circumstantial world, then it appears to be that way. So it appears like this event happens, and then that leads to this, and then that leads to that, and then that leads to an awakening or self-realization. And on the surface level, that appears to be true, but on a deeper level, actually, what I came to see is that that what is actually here, the essence of what is here, has always been here and will always be here. It's not something that was cultivated. If anything, it was more like things were being stripped away. A realization helped to then, it helped something to fall away, something that appeared to be in the way. And I think this is the importance of also being aware of the things going on in the world in terms of the geopolitical scene, you could say. It's part of shedding the old conditioning that is veiling, you could say, the truth. It's veiling the truth. So when we see through, what we may call the kind of matrix, the world matrix system, which I often also refer to as the mind matrix. The mind matrix to me is really the root of it, right? Because the mind matrix comes first, and then that is projected, and then that becomes what creates what we call the so-called outer world or the outer matrix. So from one end or the other, whether you're looking at what seems to be going on outside in society and things like that, or whether it's looking at the mind matrix and peeling away the layers of false beliefs, false identities, either side can contribute to this kind of, dropping of the illusion so that the truth can be revealed. So on one level, I can say, yes, it seems like certain things seem to lead to that, but that's only on the surface. Deeper than that, actually, it has always been here. And that's important to recognize, because otherwise someone may think, I've got to go through all of these different things to get to what I am. Whereas actually, it is already here right now if we can come to see it, if we know how to look at it. I say this is shifting into what I call direct perception. Past perception, you mentioned the past. The past perception is all secondhand. It's everything that we've been given. This is the mind matrix that we've been given, that's been passed on from generation to generation to generation. And most beings and most of us operate through this past perception. And to some degree, we have to operate in terms of our language's past perception. So there is a degree that we have to use of that. But for many of us, our whole identity is actually this past perception. And it's all of the ideas and the thoughts and the experiences of humankind that has been passed on. But we can't then actually see the reality of what is here, the truth of what is here through past perception. We can only see through direct perception, through our own authority of looking. So we have to drop actually the past perception. There has to be a cessation of the past perception in order to look from that direct perception. And this is really the directness of the spiritual path of self-realization, we could say.
Wow, that's a really deep stuff that I think will take a while to unpack. But one thing that I've heard you say repeatedly is the act of trying to live a fulfilled being or fulfilled state creates the loop of non-fulfillment. That it's walk us through what that means, because I think it really does tie into what you're outlining here.
To me, this is a really profound realization because if we look at the pattern of our lives and what we've been taught, it's always this movement towards trying to be fulfilled. And this can come in two main ways. One is we're trying to get something more that we think is going to be obviously fulfilling, pleasurable, pleasant. And this comes in the form of the desires that we may have and the goals and things of this nature and the dreams. But then there's also the side of it when it comes to the protection. We're trying to avoid certain things because we fear that we're going to lose something. So there's this constant sense of trying to protect what we have and who we think we are, and then trying to get more of what we think we need to be fulfilled. If we lose what we think we have, then we are afraid that that's going to make us unfulfilled. And if we don't get what we think we need, then we're afraid that that's not going to be able to, we're not going to get what we need to be fulfilled. But this all comes from the belief in the first place that somehow we are lacking something. And this is what I remember when I was at school being asked two key questions. The first was, what is it you want to do when you grow up? And what do you want to be when you grow up? And, you know, as a child, I was just simply enjoying the moment. I was just enjoying life, just simply being. That thought never crossed the mind. And then as soon as that thought was introduced, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Well, that implies future. And it also implies that what is happening now is not enough. So you must do something more to get something more. And also that, or should I say, what you have is not enough. And so you've got to do something more to get something more. And that who you are is not enough. And so you've got to become something more. So our society has encouraged us to constantly try to become something more and try to get something more. And in that pursuit of that, which is coming from the belief that we are lacking something, that we are lacking something, we don't have enough of something, and that we ourselves are somehow lacking, we end up coming into this unfulfilled state. And then being in the unfulfilled state, we're trying to be fulfilled, but the more we try to be fulfilled, the more that we are actually unfulfilled. Because it means that if we're trying to be fulfilled, it means we already believe and we already feel that we are unfulfilled. So it becomes a loop, a trap that we often cannot see. It becomes a blind spot that we cannot see. And so we're so busy trying to become something and get something to be fulfilled that we don't recognize that actually that is creating the issue itself. The so-called solution actually is creating and reinforcing the problem. You see? Whereas if we actually recognize that what we are and what life is already fulfilled right now, then we we enter into the fulfilled state, and then the sense of unfulfillment falls away, you see, and then we become freed from this pursuit of trying to become something more and get something more.
Wow. Yeah, it's so profound. It's incredible. And um, speaking, let's say, from personal experience, so I quit like decades long nicotine addiction. I was like a vapor, like nonstop for from the time I woke up, I was huffing on this thing, right? And then finally, I'm just like, all right, it's time to stop. It was just it was autopilot at that point, right? Just constant boom, boom, boom. And at first, the first week, yeah, it was hell. Right? It was horrible, right? It was like a part of me died. It was like my best friend. It was like mourning. Which was crazy. But then what I realized is that same pathway is there with almost everything in life. That the mind is always trying to look for something to grasp onto, something to give it relief, something to give it a sense of identity, and there's always this like background in all of the us in the mind of this non fulfillment, exactly as you say, right? It's like this almost subtle hunger that always needs, it's always more. If you
Yeah.
listen to what it's saying or asking, it's just more, right? It's like, if
Yeah.
only this one thing in my life was better, if only I was more fit, bit more money, a little bit more happy with the job, a little bit more this, anything, right? But it's just like constant perpetual background discontent, which you know once you become aware of it, it's almost a joke, right? And I hear you talk about the cosmic joke, and I'd like to kind of relate this concept to the cosmic joke. But yeah, it is funny. Like I find myself, when I'm aware of it, like laughing, right? Because
Mm.
it's this constant just voice of like, you know, like it's almost demonic. It's just like,
Mm.
if only this little bit was different, if only this was better. Like, oh, you just need a little bit, and it's,
Yes.
yeah, it's fascinating.
If you look at all of our cultures, uh, certainly the so-called modern world, we've externalized everything. The buildings that we build, the way of life, it's all an externalization of the sense that we are lacking something. So we've built a whole society around it. And it is such a joke, as you say, because when you recognize it, you see the whole futility of it. You see the whole circus of it, right? The rat race, people going round and round, exerting so much energy, so much effort to try to become something, to try to get something more, to try to be something in society, to impress, right? All of these things, so much energy is expended. And, it's like a fish that is swimming in the ocean and it's asking everybody, where is the ocean? Where is the water? And it's right there. It's right there with it, you know. So that's the cosmic joke of it is you're here all along. What you're looking for is actually right there. I use sometimes a this kind of metaphor where if you imagine yourself stood at a jewelry shop window and you're outside, you're looking through the window, you're looking at all the pretty fancy jewelry, the gold watches and the diamond rings and the silver bracelets and such. And you're thinking about how those things are going to look on you or how they're going to look on your loved ones. And all the while, something is being missed, something is being overlooked because we're so focused on the shiny objects through the window that we fail to see something that is obvious right there, and that is that our own reflection is looking back at us in the window.
Hmm.
But because we're so focused and fixated on the objects, the shiny objects, like the shiny objects of life, because we're so focused on that, we overlook our own reflection.
Hmm.
We overlook our true nature. And all that it requires is a simple shift of our attention, a simple retraction of our attention to instead of having the attention out there, focused on objects and focused on becoming something and getting something, instead we just shift the attention within
Hmm.
and we say, what is here? What is really here? What am I? What is my true nature? And we bring the attention to that and we look and we question and we come to see. And when the attention goes within and it meets the source of your experience, you could say, the source of your awareness, the source of your looking, when it meets that, it is like a homecoming. A being comes back home to themselves and they may see in that moment, this is what I was looking for. And there is a fulfilled sense because now the energy goes back to itself. Instead of the energy being drained and siphoned off in many different things, when you bring the attention back to yourself, the energy goes back to yourself. So now you have this loop of energy that is being fed back into your true self as opposed to being leaking on all the other things, the external fancy things, the trinkets of society, these illusions that are put there to give you, that you must give your energy to, you know? So it's an interesting redirection of your energy and attention.
Wow. Yeah. I find what you said there very profound. And, I feel like I get it more than most. I've lived a by choice, a very simple life. Like I moved out from the city now, as we were saying before we took on. But even still, a lot of these trappings I find, when you kind of go through, finish one layer or one level, that gets you another way. And it's like more and more subtle trappings, that
Right.
it's, like people talk about awakening as like a light switch, right? Like, oh, I realize that, the World Economic Forum is evil. Like I'm now awake to the plot, like I'm, 100% based, you know, but it's
Yeah.
really this endless levels of trappings. And I think the final frontier really is consciousness and the mind. Ultimately this is within our mind. Yeah, but I'd be very interested to maybe just for the viewers get a understanding of just kind of your worldview of reality. Like, do you think ultimately this we are just like one consciousness, that this is ultimately a dream, or a wave experiencing the ocean, as I've heard you eloquently describe, you know that what we're seeing in our own lives are merely reflections within? Like, could you maybe walk us through how you view, I guess, reality that you find yourself in?
Hmm. Well, I would again invite everybody into their own direct perception to come to look within that their own direct perception, because really this is the only way that we can come to see it for ourselves. We cannot, read it in a book or watch it in a video. We must really look within our own direct experience to see it. And we can say that we can say that if there is nothing that we can find within us that is separate from life, then no distinction, then that must mean that everything is in a connected state. Everything is in a oneness state, and that everything relies on everything else blends into everything else. It's kind of like if we think of a wall and you get, a paintbrush and you dip in it in some paint and you stick it on the wall and then you create a line all the way across. As you keep going and keep going, the paint will get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. It starts off thick, but then it gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, subtler and subtler and subtler.
Hmm.
So these are like the subtleties of life itself, as above, so below. You have these different levels, so to speak. But actually, if you take away the mind's distinction of things, then that also takes away the so-called levels. We have to, as we're communicating, we're using language, so then it makes it appear like there are potentially levels, but we can only use that as a way of speaking. Ultimately, there are no levels. There is just really one seamless whole, one seamless totality. But because of our conditioning, we create these distinctions all the time. We use the intellect and we create a distinction. We have all these borders. I mean, you look on the planet, like there are no nations apart from on a map. There's no, when you fly over from one so-called country or one state to another state, you know, you don't say that a tree is a German tree or an English tree, you know. It's a particular tree, but it doesn't belong to any nation. So the nation is just simply the ideas. This is one kind of distinction that we've created, and we've created many of these different distinctions: income bracket, class, race, religion, um, and it's the belief in these distinctions which then actually creates the kind of experience of it. It almost becomes like a simulation in the head. There's a simulation that's created, this projected simulation that's created that then makes it appear as if it is that way. But then, but that's the optical illusion that's created. It's kind of like, you see this street art, right? Where you'll see somebody paints like a big hole in the ground. And from a certain distance, it looks so real. Looks like you could fall down the hole. But if as you get closer to it, as you inspect more closely, you obviously see that it's an optical illusion. So, and once you see that optical illusion, you can't really go back from that. Now, once you see the truth, you can't go back from that. That's the nature of becoming conscious, becoming truly aware of something. Once you see it within your own direct experience, you can't really go back. So, so it's these illusions that must be seen through these distinctions. And when there is no distinction, then it becomes quite obvious to us that everything is just in this oneness state. And there are many different things that appear to be happening. These are the appearances taking place, the appearances of different beings, animals, uh, more subtle beings, just like we have, microscopic parasites or microscopic um, bacteria and insects. You also have macrocosmic uh, entities, parasites,
Hmm.
so-called positive, so-called negative. But that begs also the question, what is really positive and negative as such? Because we need the bad bacteria at times with the good bacteria to be able to survive. We need, you need this is what creates the balance of what we call life. So, so to me, all of these things are part of the play of life. I see it like a play. I don't see it as a game. The game is when we're in this conditioned mind and we think we're going to win something or we think we can lose something. We're playing a game because that's the game of the ego. The ego thinks it can win something more and it thinks it can lose something. But actually, when we see that there is that we are not an ego, then our true nature cannot actually win anything and it cannot lose anything. And that's freedom. That's freedom from the game. And then it goes from being a game to being a play. No longer are we desperately trying to win something and get something more or protect something. Actually, we are free then to just play, to enjoy and to play. So this can be seen by everybody. If they can go into their own direct perception, they can come to these realizations for themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very challenging. You know, Einstein said that reality is the most persistent illusion. And for me, a lot of what you're saying on a I can conceive of it, understand it on a conceptual, intellectual level, but fully living it, I think, is the challenge, right? Because we still see, at least, sometimes I wonder, like, I'll unplug, like, I live in the middle of nowhere, right? So my only real interaction with the clown world, as I call it, is going on social media, and if I turn it off, my life is amazing. It's just living in the present, right? And then I turn it back on and I see all the clown world insanity, then I get drawn back into it. And so a part of me just says, why do I ever go on Twitter, right? Why do because it just seems like 99% of the problems I'm supposed to worry about aren't actually real. But I guess there's also the worry of being solipsistic, where which can also turn into narcissism. I've seen it in spiritual gurus, where you just say everything and everyone is just in my head, you know which can, some people can make weird justifications for evil or harming others. It's there's no good, there's no evil. Everything's in the mind. So I mean, how do we learn this through direct experience while not going down these types of trappings in themselves, of thinking everyone is just in my own head, or nothing
Mm,
really matters. Yeah.
yes, it's a good point, and it can happen. That absolutely can happen. To me, it's coming to reconcile what seems to be a paradox, which is really not a paradox, but it appears to be so. And that is that on one seeming level, it's accepting the the role of things. So there is something is being played out. It's like an actor that goes onto a stage, right? Or that is shooting a movie. They know that they are not the character. They know that the movie is not real. They know that the play is not real on the stage, right? But yet, even though they know it's not real, they play the part to the best of their ability. They honor the part. And by honoring the part, then they are not cold towards it. There's some life now in the part that they are playing. They do it to the best of their ability. They play that role of being a mother or a brother or a sister or a son, or a particular job that they do. They play it to the very best of their ability. But the difference is that in realizing that they are not the so-called character and they are not the so-called circumstances that are playing out, they're able to actually not, they don't get identified with what happens. And by not getting identified with what happens, they don't then suffer. They don't cause unhappiness or happiness is not uncaused by what is then happening, the actions that they are taking in life and the roles that they are playing. So they're able to actually be more intensely in the world and honor those roles and play these roles, but at the same time, they know I am not that, and that this is really an illusion, and that's really an illusion, and that's really an illusion, but I will still play it to the best of my ability,
Mm.
you know? So I think any being on the spiritual path, they say that the spiritual path is like climbing the razor's edge of a mountain, right? When we start off on the path, it is broad and spacious. There is a lot of room for maneuver. But as we get further up the mountain, the ledge gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and the terrain gets more and more treacherous, and the room for error becomes less and less. And the things that worked at the beginning of the path don't necessarily work towards the end of the path because things have become even more subtle now. So, so you must um, do the necessary things and work through these subtle levels. And these are the subtle levels that we may come to realize is that so much is an illusion, so much is happening in the head. But that doesn't mean that we don't play that role to the best of our ability. But what can happen is a being can get stuck in that level of where they become so detached from everything that there is a coldness. There is a coldness there where they don't honor life. There is no honoring of what is happening, you know? So then they're not really there to play to play. They are so detached from it, become so cold. As you say, they may become very solipsist. Solipsism really is more of I would say that it is more of a state of the ego that happens in solipsism, where the ego starts to, and it can happen with a spiritual ego. There is such a thing where a spiritual ego can be created. What does ego mean? Ego is just a Latin word which means I. So ego is just I. Ego is just identification. So anything we identify with becomes a a face of the ego. And that can include spirituality, and that can happen and often does happen. It is a phase that one must go through where they first maybe start getting identified with being a spiritual person or a spiritual being, you know, or identified with a certain tradition or certain religion or a certain practice. And these can also be traps because anything that we identify with that is limited brings us into a state of limitation, brings us into a state of suffering, and is just part of the illusion, perpetuating the illusion. So we must watch out for that. We must watch out for this spiritual ego that can take place, which, as you say, can become narcissistic in some ways as well. So these are these subtle traps that we must look out for, and um, and that is why it's often necessary to have some kind of guidance or ability for certain things to be pointed out, so that then we don't fall into those particular traps then ourselves. You know.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, when we see what's happening in the world now, I think there's a sense of, almost apocalypse. Biblical, we're living through biblical times, end of the world. And it's funny
Mm,
that I think people have always thought it was the end of the world, but it does feel pretty heavy in a lot of ways, right? We have these self-professed elites who are talking about, mass depopulation. They're talking about microchipping. They're talking about central bank digital currency, basically building, a technological slave state, and for me, I don't think the answer is in politics. I think it's in um, just saying no. I think most of this is due to our consent, you know, so saying no and building
yes.
parallel systems. Others think, you have to fight against it, and I think there's a place for that as well, and building awareness, right? But then I also think there can be a trap when you're constantly focusing on the bad. It's I call it the truth or trap, or a doom loop, right? Or trauma bonding, right? Right. A lot of internet is just people bonding about the trauma of the evil reptilian elites. So long-winded way of saying, for me, if somebody asks, what do we do in these perilous times, I say become self-sufficient, turn off your screens as much as possible, and build the life you want to build. And a lot of it is in the mind. What would you tell people who are afraid of this kind of slave state that they seem to be trying to build? What would be your answer to them? Would it be to go within, or yeah, please?
To me, it is a case of both. It is a case of acting if you feel to act. If you feel called to act and do something, then by all means, because the action that we take is an extension of the state of mind, which is an extension of the state of consciousness. So the more conscious we become, our state of being changes. As our state of being changes, our action changes. So if we are taking certain actions that are not in alignment with our state of being and who we really are, then that can actually create a disharmony there. So ultimately, it comes from the inner first. So yes, absolutely. I always say, you must come to know what you are. Come to know what you are, directly experience that, and then begin to live as that. And as you live as that, then naturally these kinds of actions will be taken. If somebody comes along and says, you must do this, you must do that, in that moment, in some way, what will come through you will be the right action, will be the right action will be taken in that moment if we stay in the true consciousness of what we are. But when we fall into the ego, and that's part of what drives the ego is fear. Fear and desire. Fear and desire. These are the two main motivating factors for the ego. And we see, right, that this is how societies, governments can, or corporations can control people, is they do it through fear and desire, scarcity, and the idea that something is going to fulfill you if you get it. And but if you're not operating from the ego, then you can't be pulled into those states. You can't be pulled into a state of fear. And you can't be tempted with something, a temptation, right? The temptation of something. So just from that alone, by not being in fear and not being lulled into temptation, straight away right there, the so-called outside has no power over you. So when we realize what we are like that, no power can be taken over you. So that alone, just that alone is very powerful. And then from that, the right actions will come. And when we're operating from a certain level of consciousness, the actions that we take will be of a greater quality than if we're operating from the ego. When we take action from the ego, it is of a lesser quality, and it is coming from these motivating factors of fear and uh, desire, the temptation, trying to become something more, get something more. But when we operate from the true nature, that's true power because we're operating from oneness. True power is the power of oneness, not the power of manipulation. You know,
Mm.
we've often been taught manipulation is power. But actually, the oneness is where the true power is. Manipulation is always short-lived, but but to be situated in our true nature, in that oneness of our true nature, To me, this is the real power that is lasting and sustainable because now you're aligning with the whole of life that is then supporting you.
Hmm.
You're supported by life. So you begin to trust that. So if people are afraid, it's because they're not seeing the truth of who they are, and therefore they're not able to then trust that. And so naturally, there's going to be fear because they think they are just a separate self, a separate ego that can be harmed, that can win something and can lose something. And that's what the whole society banks on is a being that is trapped in that state because that's the only way to control them. You cannot control a being who truly knows and lives as who they are. It is not possible. And, when we look at examples like Mahatma Gandhi, his approach, he was essentially doing that. He was essentially staying in his true nature. Now, this might mean that you go out and do something. You might go out and do some kind of activism. You might speak out against things, but you're doing it from a place of not being afraid, a place of not being able to be tempted, therefore, from a place of not being able to be controlled. And that is so much more powerful than if somebody's coming from that the ego state, the mind identified state, if that makes sense.
Oh, it definitely does. Yeah, and thank you for clarifying that. Well, it's very interesting that, if you take kind of level one awareness of the system that we find ourselves in, there is this intentional dumbing down of people, this, distraction, right? Endless distractions, endless bells and trinkets. And then you get into, you know, um, kind of a bit deeper level, say in Gnosticism, they talk about the fact that the archons, or demiurge, they're trying to suppress human nature, right? And then you hear out of body experiences or near death experiences where people are describing the same, this almost technology to keep us in a reincarnation trap, a reincarnation cycle. Along all these different types of data points, it seems that there is this willful intention to suppress us, to keep us in our lower state, our lower level of consciousness. And I would presume it would be for the reasons you're outlining, that when we are actually in our true direct consciousness, that we aren't controllable. And maybe that really is the cosmic joke, is that, it's literally by our own lack of awareness collectively, or whatever that means, that that we find ourselves in this play of, good versus evil.
Hmm. Yes. It's like a whisper in the ear, you know. That's that temptation that you see, they know at the highest level, anybody that understands the nature of life, the natural laws of life, right? We know that if we impose on somebody else's free will, there's a consequence for that. And and if these different beings are intelligent enough, they will understand that you cannot directly impose on someone's free will. But what you can do is you can influence. You can whisper in the ear, and then you can tempt, or you can create fear to get someone to do something. But actually, in a way, you're not really forcing them to do it. All that's happening is you're creating simply an illusion that then the individual themselves is either buying into or they don't buy into it. So it is funny in that sense, as you say, because actually, the way I see it is that people are doing things unconsciously. When I was young, this is one of the things I recognized at a very young age. I seem to have a bit of an awareness of this, and I recognized how people were doing things in society that they didn't really want to do, but they thought that they had to do, you know? And for me as a child, I couldn't understand that. I was like, you can see that you don't, or I could see you don't have to do it, but then they were thinking that they had to do it, you know? And I could see that no, but you don't have to do it. You could just not do it. But the fear was gripping them. The fear was gripping them,
Mm-hmm.
so that's what made them do it. But actually, nobody really made them do it. Their own fear made them do it. So this is kind of the whole trick of it is to influence. And it's funny, we live in the age of influences now, you know, the influence age, but we've always had that to some degree. Now we're bombarded with it from many different angles. And actually, I think that a lot of what's going to come out of this kind of oversaturation of information that we're bombarded with on social media and TV and all these different sources is that eventually people are going to hopefully come to realize that they must rely on themselves. They must become self-sufficient within themselves. That doesn't mean that they don't do things with other people or don't listen to other people, but ultimately it means that they must begin to trust themselves, their true self, and trust that inner guidance and have and work from the inner guidance as opposed to listening to the outside. That has been so much of the problem if you think about it throughout history. People were listening. They were subservient, like a victim, listening to the religious priests and people, or to the kings and queens, or you know the emperors, and now in the modern day listening to the corporations and to the government and such. Right? It's all this externalization of our power, giving away the power, and this is how a lot of these archons work and dark, demonic entities, if you will. The word demon, mon, like mono, means one. So a demon is just simply a being or an entity that is moving away from the one. They just move away from the one. That's it. They're not, instead of moving towards oneness or recognizing oneness or living from a state of oneness in accordance with oneness, they live going away from the oneness because they themselves have succumbed to the ego. They've become identified on some level with being a separate entity that needs to then suck energy from something else or needs to, uh, try to manipulate others. But they do it in a very subtle way of influencing. And if they can influence, then they can feed off of that energy. They feed off the energy of fear. They feed off the energy of extreme desire, or lust, temptation. So yeah, to me it is very funny because actually it is all being self-created. It is all being self-created, and the suffering that people experience really, at the very root, it's going on within. It starts within. It begins and ends within each being,
Mm-hmm.
and then we see the so-called reflection of it outside. But when we think it is outside, we put all the attention there and we don't recognize that actually we're not looking at the source of what is creating it and perpetuating it. And so when it comes to any idea of like a trap or soul trap and things like these, they are the so-called reflections of the fact that actually a being is trapping themselves because it goes back to that temptation and that fear again. Oh, you must reincarnate again, you know? But nobody's grabbing you and pushing you and throwing you back in. It is done through deception and influence. But if we allow ourselves to be deceived, and the only way that we will be deceived is when we don't know who we are, when we don't know what life is. If we think we are a separate ego entity, then we will still have attachments to the world, to our former life, to certain people. And so it's very easy then to get you to say, oh yeah, reincarnate, go back. because there's something within you that is attached and tied um to going back, you see. So if we get clear on the nature of who we are and the nature of how things are, we can never be tricked. We can never be tricked. And we will not get influenced. The decision, the decision, the action, the guidance will come from our own inner guidance. And that's what the system fears most.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very profound. And I've been doing a lot of deep dives into this reincarnation soul trap concept, and we see from many different data points, whether it be people remote viewing the afterlife to out of body experiences to near death experiences. We see hundreds of these stories of exactly as you say, there are beings there when we die that use our attachments against us almost narcissistically to convince us to go back. I read one story that that really woke me up to this concept where it was like a 4-year old who had a near death experience, and he's like, yeah, I saw Jesus, and he was telling me that I left the bread open once and it went bad, and that's why you have to go back because you made your mommy sad. So it's clear there is deep levels of manipulation happening here. And I think some would argue that is this ultimately fair, if you have young people being manipulated again and again and again back into it. Some people make the arguments, that it isn't as consent positive, to
Mm.
which, at least for me, I kind of take a similar approach to you. It really is ultimately at a deeper level becoming aware of our true power. In our egoic state, we are very easily manipulated, right? And yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be just curious, maybe broadly, do you think everything is ultimately like of consent? Is it ultimately because we are allowing it? Because you see these deep manipulations happening. So maybe you could speak to that. The role of consent in these things.
Well, again, I think there is a combination because not every being may be wise enough to understand the law of consent in natural law, so they may break that. So there might be instances where something is imposed on somebody, but they will obviously have to suffer the consequences of that action. Um, so I think there is a combination of these things happening, but ultimately, if we look at life, we can see really it's like a continuation. You know, how we are is continue because of memory, the memory that we have. You see like birds, how do birds know how to, migrate in certain directions, right? As soon as they're born, there's certain things that seem to be programmed into them, and even human beings, I think of someone like a Mozart, right? The composer Mozart, he wrote his first symphony at age 4. How did he know? How did he have that knowledge to write that symphony? Unless unless it was somehow passed on in the memory. And this is where we must come to see that obviously we are not just this body. There is a more subtle energy that we have that has the ability to accumulate karma, accumulate, as some cultures call it, like an energetic residue. This kind of residue that gets rubbed off. Now, the way in which we take that on is by us becoming identified with the experience that is happening. So if someone gets identified with being a particular person, then the experiences that happen to them in life creates an imprint on them. And then that imprint, it like rubs off like software. there's a memory to it. Basically, their memory creates that imprint and they hold the memory. So then they continue that on. They continue that memory on as long as they keep remaining identified with being a certain person and certain experiences. And this is where the spiritual path comes in and self-realization is that we are starting to, as we move along the path, we are peeling away these layers of false identity in which we're seeing that we are not just a body and we're not even just this energy body, what we may some people call the soul. We're actually even beyond that. We're even beyond that. So once we see that we are beyond that and we become more established in that and we give more attention to that and we stop giving identification to things that we are not, then we stop accumulating karma. And this is something that is spoken about in many of the ancient spiritual traditions is as we start to find freedom, liberation, through this dissolution of the dissolution of the false, then what goes along with that is the karma. So we no longer become bound by past karma and we no longer incur new karma because we're no longer identified with that as who we are. Like if you go to most people in the street and you say, "Who are you?" What they will probably tell us is their name, their religion, their race, their gender, their, belief systems and all these things, right? That's who they think that they are. But and so as long as they think that's who they are, which is all memory, then they're just living through the past. So the whole sense of identity is through the past. This is something I speak a lot about. The person, the ego, is a product of the past and made of the past. So each moment a being, as they wake up, they are remembering, they're putting together this memory of who they think that they are, which is the continuation of the karma,
Mm,
you see?
yeah.
Because they may believe something about themselves. So let's say they believe that they are unworthy, right? So they carry this memory of being unworthy, this belief of being unworthy. So that then influences, they become bound by that belief, bound by that memory, bound by that piece of karma, and they're doomed to replay that, to repeat that. So this is why we must, on the spiritual path of being, strips all of that away. They transcend that, you could say, or they dissolve that. And only when that happens do they go to the pure state of their true being, in which at that place there is no longer the karma cannot hold them anymore.
Mm,
And eventually the karma will be dissolved so that they become free from that. And they will also not incur new karma because they're not identified with being the person or the ego and thinking they are doing something. The do what they often call the doer, right? The doer is the one that takes credit for, oh, I did this, I did that, this happened to me, that happened to me. It's just another way of saying the ego or the person. I use these terms synonymously. Ego, doer, person, they are really speaking of the same, the same sense. And all of these, if one operates through all of these, then they incur new karma and they carry the old karma. And so then that is like the software that creates the loop like a Groundhog Day.
mm-hmm.
That's the Groundhog Day that then people are experiencing. So because they're carrying this memory, this karma, they seem to keep repeating certain experiences and certain experiences keep happening to them, which only then often reinforces that karma and makes it stronger, you see.
Yeah. Wow.
So if we recognize this, then we recognize that the only way that we're going to get out of it is we've got to go beyond the karma, which happens by going back to our true nature and dissolving the false identities of what we are not. Otherwise, in some way, shape, or form, that will begin to repeat itself. Just like you see people in relationships, they keep getting themselves into the same kind of relationships, and they ask, they say they don't know why. They say, why do I keep attracting the same people and getting the same relationships? And they're not necessarily looking at themselves or the patterns that they have in themselves. They think they've just got bad luck, maybe, but they can't see it's a tendency that they've got. They've got a certain tendency that is actually creating that. And until they get rid of that tendency, it will seem to repeat itself in the reflective world.
Man, so deep. It's incredible. I've when you're talking about waking up, I've experienced this myself. Every morning when I wake up, right, there's this like 1 minute, 30-second period where I'm just awareness. And then I hear this like voice, you know, telling me who I am. Like, oh yeah, you're here. Yeah, you're located here, but you're gonna do this. This is who you are. And I've even had an experience with chronic pain. Like I had an injury, right? And when I wake up and I don't feel it at all, and then there's like a voice in the head. It's like, oh, by the way, like your back's out right now, and then all of a sudden my back is now hurting. Whereas before, in that state
Yeah.
before, it was like I was totally fine walking around, and I've been aware of this process happening, and so yeah, I wonder. I mean, it sounds like that's very similar to what you're describing here, but almost in a meta sense that even our entire lifetime after lifetime, we're doing this thing based off residual memory. So, I mean,
Yes.
how do we break this practically?
Yes.
And I would love to maybe if we could also draw on your own experience, like when you're in the state of consciousness, do you think you're fully free from these types of hooks, or is it still a process for you as well?
Well, that's why I like the name of your podcast, Spellbreaker, because it is that's what it's like. It's like breaking a spell. There's it's a trance. It's like a trance where in the unconscious state, which is the mind identified state, that is being trapped in the memory. That is the memory. So, like, if you look at the content of the mind, like you said, that voice, right? And all of the conversation that takes place in as the mind, it's all memory. Language is memory. Imagination comes from memory because you can only visualize something that you've seen before.
Hmm.
Even if you try to visualize something unique, it will be bits and pieces that you've put together of things that you've previously seen. We cannot imagine something completely uh, unique by itself. We can only create a remix of what we've previously seen based on the data that we've picked up, and then we project that or imagine something. So the whole content of the mind is actually past. It's all past information, past memory. So when we live through that, we don't actually see reality as it is in this moment because we're looking through the eyes of the past, not through the eyes of the present. So it's like being in a trance, and that's the state of unconsciousness. When we live through that, it's a state of unconsciousness. And then that whole memory, the karma, just dictates what we then will experience because it dictates how we think and perceive things and our reactions. And then, of course, that leads to an effect in what we call the so-called outer world, in how other people react to us and how situations unfold and such. So, what you come to see is that these patterns that we may hold is what is perpetuating the same kinds of experiences that we keep having. And until we become aware of that and break that spell, and the spell is ultimately the spell of being a limited identity. It's the spell of being an ego, the spell of being a person. right? The spell of being a doer, the one that thinks, oh, I'm the one that's doing things and making things happen. It's us not recognizing that there is this oneness intelligence there that we really are, that we essentially are, you know? And when we recognize that, we see that what we are as that actually is not it's not in the mind. So we go beyond mind. A being must go beyond mind, which is going beyond the karma, to become free from it. As we go beyond the mind, what happens is that the mind starts to become less and less because we're not feeding the mind with identification anymore and belief. The feeding of it with belief and identification is what gives it its power, it's like a fuel for it. The mind has no fuel of its own. It borrows its life from us, from our true nature. When we get identified with it, when we give it attention, when we believe it. That's what keeps it going. So when we retract that and recognize that actually we are not in the mind and we are not the mind and we've never been in the mind, then it's like clouds in the sky that start to disperse under the heat of a hot sun. You know, like when it's a really red hot day, when the sun is super hot, it just burns through all of the cloud vapor, right? So then you end up with a clear blue sky, spacious sky. So then our inner space of the so-called mind becomes spacious and clean and pure because we're now standing in the position of our true nature, which is like the essence of like the heat of a hot sun, right? When we're being this conscious seer of the the thoughts start to just disperse and disappear, dissolve. So it thins out, and what goes along with that are all these karmic patterns, you see. So the more established you get in that, it comes to a point where then the mind cannot overtake you anymore because you then no longer get identified with the mind. You're no longer identified with the body. You're no longer identified with the mind. You remain only in your true nature. And so then nothing can actually uh, shake you from that. Whether the body is ill, whether there is an emotion of anger that arises, whether there is a bad mood that arises, whether there is a negative thought that arises, because these things will still likely come from time to time, right? As long as there is a so-called body here, there is going to be certain things that's going to take place. Pain will happen, challenges will happen, a bad mood will happen, a negative emotion will happen, but they'll be less likely to happen because you're not feeding them with identification. But they may arise from time to time. But even if they arise, as long as you are able to see, I am not that. I am not the body. The body is sick or ill. I am not the body. If we realize we are not the body, even when it is sick and ill, it doesn't affect the true nature of what we are. Nothing can touch it.
Mm.
I invite people when I take people through direct perception. I take them through a process of self-investigation, coming into their own direct perception to see for themselves. And what I invite them to look at is one of the questions I ask is when you look within to find yourself, can you find yourself as an object?
Mm.
Is there something there like when we go through the process, we often see that, okay, I'm not the body. I take them through a process of questions where they look at what is changing and what is not changing. If something is changing, coming and going, then ultimately it cannot be the truth. Because if something is the truth, it is always the truth. It is always permanent. It's a constant nature. But if something is coming and going, it can't be the ultimate. truth because it's here 1 minute, gone the next. So it never really had any true reality to it. It was just a temporary appearance. So as we go through inquiry, I invite people to look and see what is it within you, who is it within you, or what is it in what you call life that is changeless, that is not coming and going, that is permanent, that is constant. And as people go through this investigation, they start to see that there is something within them that's always been there from a young child, from the child's body to the teenager's body to the young adult's body to the middle-aged body. There's been this essence that's been aware of all of those experiences that has not changed, even though all of those bodies have changed. Right? On the surface, they've changed, but underneath at the deeper level, the one that's been experiencing those things has not changed. So they begin to become aware of that which is beyond the body because the body changes, emotions change, sense perceptions change, moods change, thoughts change, beliefs change. But there is something deeper that is always there, aware of your experience that has not changed. So as a being starts to look and become aware of that, I then invite them to say, this, this, this one within you that is unchanging, is it an object? Can you find it as an object? And what people often find, but I invite people to look for themselves, is they come to see that no, it's not an object. It's not a separate object that I can find, that I can, grasp or hold. So if it is not an object, then that must mean that it cannot be harmed. And if it cannot be harmed, then what is there to fear? So once we see that our true nature is indestructible, immortal, imperishable, because it is not an object, because it is not subject to change. Once we see that and we rest from that place, we recognize that we're already looking from that place. This is the interesting thing. It's not that we're trying to get to that place. The funny thing is we're already looking from that place, but we're overlooking it because we think we're in the mind. It's like thinking that we are on the ground, looking at the sun, thinking that to get to the sun, we've got to go through the clouds to get to the sun. But actually, in reality, we're already in the position of the sun. So it's an illusion. We don't have to go through the clouds. We're already there. We're already on the other shore. But we think we've got to do something to get to the other shore. Once this becomes very apparent to us and clear to us, then whatever thought comes, whatever emotion comes, whatever feeling comes, whatever challenge comes in life, in our circumstances, in the so-called world circumstances, or in our physical body, nothing can dethrone us from that true nature. Nothing has the power to dethrone us. Nothing has the power to stain us. It cannot be stained. Our true nature cannot be stained. It's like trying to throw black paint in the air and thinking that the black paint is gonna color the space, right? Stain the space. It's like that. You can't stain space. It's like um our houses, right? All of our houses on a street. Is the space in this room different than the space in the room there? If we think yes, it is only because it appears to be because we've created a distinction in terms of a building. We've put a building in place with walls. These are the objects. But actually, if we bulldoze over all of the buildings and the space is just there, was it ever really a separate space? Or did it only appear to be separate for a short time because we built these divisions called houses, right? So actually, and if you bulldoze over the space, is it affected? The space cannot be affected. You can destroy a house, but the space itself cannot be affected. And you need space for there to be objects. You can have space without objects, but you can't have objects without space, right? So it's kind of like that. We come to see that our true nature is almost like this indestructible, stainless space, imperishable. And what that means is nothing can harm it. So therefore, there is nothing to fear. And only the ego fears, and the ego fears because it has not come to see this truth. It has not come to see the truth of what it actually is at the source, you see. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It's just such profound concepts. I'm gonna have to do one of your retreats because I just love it so much, man. It's incredible stuff. It's very very liberating what you're saying here, and I think I mean I love the lightness with which you say it, right? But you know, let's say my ego pushes back in that like what you're talking about is actually antithetical to like everything. You know, like we're raised by people entrapped in this mind matrix from birth. Nobody within it can see outside of it, right? It's like
No.
it's the equivalent of telling a fish they're in water. You know what I mean? Like this is
Yes.
the fundamental level of kind of the forces of nature that we're messing with here. You know, by being able to transcend, right? Like the illusion goes so deep, right? We're raised by people who have been brought up in the mind matrix. You know, everywhere around us it's being perpetually reinforced. And then even within the spiritual movement, let's say that's a few, rungs up in terms of awareness, there is always this sense of exactly as you lay out, like they're having to become, having to achieve, having to do, having to take an action, to eventually arrive at a place when, where you're basically to- tossing that all out and saying, hey, you're already there. The illusion is that, the illusion is that you haven't arrived yet. It's it's trippy stuff, right? It's
Yeah.
intense. It's
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, it's really an impossible uh, message for the ego to hear because the ego, its whole existence is based on doing something. So, so if you don't give it something to do, it cannot exist. And that's really the whole thing, isn't it? Because if there is nothing to do, then it cannot exist, and therefore it's not there, you see. But it's a tough pill to swallow because it's so conditioned to think I must do something, I have to do something, I've got to get somewhere, I've got to become something, I got to achieve realization or enlightenment or whatever it may be, or freedom. So yeah, the core of, I guess, what is being said is that the trap, which is an illusion, is or created by an illusion, is this idea that you are not already what you truly are, and that you've got to do something to get to it, and or that a being is identified with being what they are not. So this is what keeps it going round and round and round. But for people that cannot quite hear what's being said, that it does not ring true or create a realization, then there are ways that can be there are certain methods that can be worked with to help to, you could say, for a being to kind of ease into that and to look at that for themselves. Meditation is a beautiful practice, and self-investigation, a very powerful practice that one can do. That's the most direct way that I have found is self-investigation, to ask the right questions, because it really chops through and cuts through um, the illusions like a sword cutting through, you know. It's very direct because we're looking in this moment. Really, there are two kind of approaches as what's called the progressive path and the instantaneous path. And the progressive path is this idea that you're working with some kind of technique or method or system that eventually is going to create the result that you will arrive at this place of your true nature and of freedom. Whereas the instantaneous path is saying, no, you are already there right now. It is already the case right now. All you have to do is realize it. And that can be done through asking certain questions, can be done by just looking within your own direct experience and seeing the truth. But we often don't want to look within. We're so focused outside. You know, even people that are on the spiritual path, they maybe spend more time reading books and watching videos and studying rather than going based on their own direct experience.
Mm.
You know, the way I see it is that we must be like a scientist, you know, a true scientist. What does a true scientist do? They should just put something under a microscope and look and see what is there, you know. Do the experiment and see what the result is without any kind of bias, without preconceived notions. Ideally, they should come open. And this is what I think this is the first main step is it's realizing that we don't know, that we can't understand, that the mind is not the tool for the job. Thought is not the tool for the job, and it's the only tool that we have.
Mm.
And and it's trying because it's constantly dissecting things, and a thought a thought is finite, and something that is finite cannot understand something that is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot encapsulate the infinite. So we have to go beyond the finite. We have to go beyond thought to come to see what is here. And that's what direct perception is. We must become very still. We must stop and look. Stop and look. Stopping means not just stopping the body, stopping means stopping the mind,
Mm-hmm.
which everyone can do for a moment or two. Everyone has the power to just stop engaging in the thought process just for 1 to 2 seconds, a few moments, to be able to just look from their own direct perception. And that is the only way to be then clear. And the right questions then direct our attention in the right way. So like this question of like the 4 questions I invite people into in the rediscovery process that I put together was the first question is when am I? So you ask yourself, when am I? Sounds like a very strange question. When would you ever ask that? When am I? What it's implying is, or hinting at, is in terms of the so-called time, you know, when are you? Are you in the future? Are you in the past? When are you? It's a reminder to look and be like, oh, right, okay. And then the second question is, what is really here? What is actually really here? In this moment right now, what is here? We think we know what everything is. Oh, this is a microphone. This is a laptop. This is a divider. But these are the concepts that we've been given of the past, right? We take the concepts of the past and we project them on to this moment. So we don't see the isness of this moment. So the question of what is really here is inviting us to see if we can see the isness of this moment. But one thing that we might arrive at through this question particularly is I don't know. What is really here? Actually, I don't know. Because if I strip away all of my concepts, all of my knowing, my knowledge, which has been passed on to me, I actually come to see I don't know. I don't know what anything is. You know, the I think it was the Greeks, they didn't reference or have a concept of the color blue. When they used to speak about the sea or the sky, they called it a red winey color, like a red winey color. So is it because they didn't have the concept of blue that they then couldn't see blue? Or is it that the concept itself creates the experience of what we call blue?
Mm.
So what that means is that, and the same is true for pink. They never recognized pink. Pink was just obviously a shade of red. But now we see pink as something distinct. What if it's the language itself, the information, the knowledge that's passed on that is actually creating experiences that are not really the true nature of reality itself? Becomes like an overlay that taints what we see, so that we don't see things as they are. We only see them as our mind projects them to be based on the past information that we have,
Mm-hmm.
based on the knowledge. So if we recognize that that is true, then we may come to recognize from that, oh, well, I can't know then. How can I know? I can't know. The only thing I can know is the knowledge that I have from the past. Other than that, I can't know. But that is a great starting point to say I don't know, because when we say we don't know, now it disarms the mind and it leaves us open. It puts us into that state that we had when we were a child, that state of wonderment, that state of awe, right? Where we just looked at things and we're like, I don't know what I am looking at. Before we were taught that this is this and that is that and that is that, we just had whoa, this state of wonderment, this state of awe. So we return back to that, and this is the foundation then for us to actually now come to see what something is. Because now the mind is disarmed. We're no longer looking through the eyes of the past. Now we have an opportunity to look freshly through the eyes of the present.
Mm-hmm.
And direct perception must always be fresh. Like, even if somebody goes into self-investigation through direct perception and they arrive at an answer, they may say, like, let's say the first question, when am I? Someone might say, I am now, right? I am here, I am now. That is now just a pointer. The deeper question is, or a follow-up question to that is actually, what is the direct experience of now? Go to the direct experience of now, you see?
Mm.
Because otherwise, if you just keep it as an answer, all that happens is that that then now goes into the memory bank, and then a person thinks, oh, I know what the answer is, and they're just living through knowledge again. So then they've lost they've lost the freshness of this moment, the newness of this moment. So we can't rely on the past. The best that the past knowledge can do is be a pointer to the isness of the present, the pureness of the present,
Mm.
even beyond the term present itself. And then the third question is then asking, who or what am I? Who or what really am I? And as we spoke about earlier, we can approach that firstly by looking at what we are not, and based on what is that which is coming and going versus what is constant. Whatever we truly are, the truth must be constant, must always be there. If it is this eternal essence that we're looking for, it must always be there. So we can deduct what we are not by looking at the things that come and go and is not eternal, is not going to last. Once we deduct what we are not, we get closer to what we are. Oh, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not that. So we start looking deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually we might find the source of our experience, the source of that which is unchanging in the midst of the things that are changing. And then the fourth question is to ask the question, where am I? Where am I located? Can I find myself in a specific location? When I look within, can I find out who I am in a specific location? They have a term in uh, science now, I think, called non-local,
Mm-hmm.
non-locality.
Yep.
So sometimes what a being comes to see is that actually when they look within, they can't find themselves in a certain location. They can't find the source of what they are. There don't, doesn't seem to be a particular location to it that they can point to and say it's here or it's there or it's there. So if they can't find themselves in a certain location, then they must not be in a certain location, which means that they must be boundless everywhere and nowhere. See? So so I take people through this investigation so they can come to see for themselves and ask them certain questions, follow-up questions that give them then the ability to see this truth and then not only see the truth of what they are, but then from now seeing the truth of what they are, they can then begin to question some of the false beliefs that they might be holding that is creating limitation for them.
Mm.
For instance, the belief in time, the belief in lack, the belief in separation, you know, the belief in personal control and different things of this nature. We can then start to look at all of that. The belief in being able to be harmed in some way, like we said earlier.
Yeah.
What an amazing realization to see I cannot be harmed. My true nature cannot, no matter whatever happens to this body or even my state of mind, at the essence of what I am, I can never be harmed. I can never be destroyed. If we really realize that, what a freedom. And that leads to tremendous peace because then we relax. Because there's no threat anymore. The ego is living in a constant state of threat, isn't it? Constantly in a state of threat. Because it's always fearing something because it feels separate. So it's always trying to fight for its position. It's always trying to fight for its survival. So it's in a constant state of threat. But our true nature, being immortal, does not need to, is not in a state of threat. So it can relax, be tranquil, be peaceful, blissful, free. All the beautiful, pleasant qualities arise in this realization of our true nature.
Well, I think that the tough part is also the system we find ourselves in, right? Like the in the Bible, Jesus says, does the bird think for the morrow? Does the bird stress
Right.
of, the worm? But when we are in a fraction reserve debt based system that's collapsing. Like even I live in the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere, and I'm trying to find places to like do some off roading, and there's like fences, do not trespass, I will shoot you, and I'm like, whoa, it's kind of all right, and we all still have to engage the system. I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but we still to an extent have to engage and make money and pay rent or pay buy property or this, and so I think that's where I think a lot of people maybe get over identified with that struggle. Or yeah, how would you respond to that?
Mhm.
Because it's at least for me in my life, like I live a good blessed life, but for me it's still in the back of my mind. These are things that I'm we all have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
Or do we not have to? And that's an illusion. Is money an illusion?
Well, the real illusion is the illusion of being this separate person. When this illusion of the separate person is seen through and disappears because actually it doesn't exist in the first place, um, but a being must come to see that for themselves, then they are freed from then what we call life is not the same anymore. You see, the person lives through a personal story, and it obviously takes everything personally. So so its experience is constantly in a state of threat, in a state of fear, in a state of suffering. It has the constant highs and the lows. A dualistic experience is what it has.
Mm,
But when we realize we are not the person and the person is not there, then there is a non-dual direct experience that is unfolding, but it's unfolding for no separate person. It's not a personal experience anymore. At that point, what has happened is that simply there is just the oneness operating through that particular body mind. So there is no longer my life, personal life, and this is scary to the ego, of course, what I'm saying. This is no longer my life, my personal life. A being simply becomes the expression of the pure life itself. They've returned back to that one intelligence, that one true intelligence. And now it is that is now unfolding and operating through that body mind.
mm,
And then that's where grace comes in, to be graceful, right? To live with grace and live with ease. That can only come through the supreme intelligence. It cannot come from the ego. So then your whole way of life becomes very graceful and of ease, easy living, becomes easy living. And again, someone may say, yeah, but how can you have easy living when you've got all these challenges? But but the challenge is seen as bad and negative only to the person. To the to the being that has dissolved the person, challenges are just seen as they're not seen as good or bad, right or wrong. They're just seen as another happening of life,
mm,
or just another appearance that is happening. All of that will continue to appear, or maybe it won't. The appearance will change, just as the way of life changes. So when there is not the person there getting identified with everything, then things can continue on in a very much more easy way. And there is a peace there. There will always be an undercurrent of peace because you've brought the suffering to an end. Because a question that we can ask, a powerful question, is who is the sufferer? When a being is in a state of suffering, who is suffering in that moment?
the ego,
Is
right?
it the
Yeah.
one? It's the ego, right? It's not the one true intelligence. It's the ego.
Huh.
The
Yeah.
ego is suffering. It's because what happens when it's suffering, it says, why has this happened to me? Why did this person do this to me? The me is an expression of the ego. Why did I am like this? I am depressed. I am unworthy. I am unhappy. I. That's the ego's thoughts. My life, what, why has he taken my car away from me? Why have they taken my money away from me? This is another expression of the ego because it's identified with these things, you see.
Mm.
So it's the ego that suffers or the person. So if the ego or the person is seen to be an illusion, what does that mean about the suffering?
Yeah. Ultimately, it's an illusion as well.
It's been created out of a misperception. Now, I'm not saying that people are not really suffering in a sense. There is suffering happening, but it's an illusion created out of misperception. And the misperception is I am a separate person. I am the ego. I am this body. I am my mind. I am my beliefs. I am my opinions. I am my life um, situation or circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than actually what I am is this one true intelligence, supreme intelligence, or God, or um, the infinite, whatever you want to call it. Now, there's a danger. There's a danger in this real, potentially in this realization. This is where the ego could hijack this realization. And this is where actually a lot of the darker forces, this is where they have got stuck. They came to realize some divinity within them, but then the ego came in and identified with the ego, and then they say as an ego, I am God. We are gods. And then that's very dangerous because it is a spiritual ego that thinks it is God and then thinks that it has power over other people. That's not what's being said here. What's being said is that this one true intelligence doesn't belong to anybody, doesn't belong to any ego. Because actually, there is not two separate persons here speaking. That's an illusion. It only appears like there's two separate persons. The same intelligence, the same one intelligence that is there within you is the same one intelligence that is here within me and that is within all of the viewers. It does not belong to anybody. It does not belong to the person. So if we realize that, then there's no danger of the ego or the person coming in and hijacking that whole realization.
Wow. Man, it's so deep. I have some more questions for you, but I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have a bit more
Yeah. Yeah, let's
availability?
go. Let's go a
Okay,
little bit more. Yeah, let's
cool.
do it.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. I didn't check in before, so I just wanted to be
That's
respectful there. Um, in my own life, I have, what you're describing, I've experienced to a limited degree in my own life. Like, I find my life, most things just kind of come with ease, and it's kind of often been that way. Like everybody just said I had a horseshoe up my behind or something, like like always worked for it, but things would come to me, business transactions, like, luck, what would seem to be miraculous things, at the nick of time, somebody appears right when I need it,
hmm
this type of stuff, and I really related that to my, connection with God, or, within, internal connection to source, whatever we want to call it there. And then I've seen the opposite, as you describe, people who are perpetually not just getting in abusive relationships again and again, but even circumstances, like external circumstances, find them, right? Like fights find them, and violence finds them, and people will rear end them like 9 times in their lives. You know what I mean? Like it's bizarre. And so to me, I've kind of concluded that our, let's say, vibrational state, for lack of a better, you know awareness, whatever we want to call, really does bring in these experiences, and this concept of manifestation as well. A lot of people speak to this reality, which I've experienced. I did manifestation exercises, and now I'm living the life that I wanted to manifest, right? And so, I'd be
Yeah.
really curious to get your perspectives on this type of concept around, manifestation, and, tuning in. Do you think when you become more aware of your direct experiences, does that allow you to kind of shift your life more at ease? Does it allow you to bring in more experiences, as well? Because, man, a lot of people who talk about manifestation also talk about it from a very egoic perspective. as well. So
Right.
yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
curious, and maybe if you can also relate to your personal experience about manifestation with respect to becoming more aware or conscious. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, sure, sure. So, you see, if we align ourselves with the one, if we align ourselves with that one intelligence, that true intelligence, and we begin to live from that and take actions from that, then we have the whole support of life behind us.
Hmm.
The whole support of life behind us, like a wave that has the whole of the ocean behind it, you know? And but if we're coming from more ego-based desires, then yes, of course, there can be certain things that are manifested, created, but actually, what I have come to see is that what we call the universe is it's a very corrective force. It seeks to create alignment. It wants alignment. So if a being is out of alignment, and what does it mean to be out of alignment? It means that they're operating not in alignment with truth, but in alignment with illusion. So as an example, rather than operating from the realization of being one and therefore being of service to the one, they're operating from a state of separation and so being and trying to have service just to themselves.
Hmm.
And what will what can happen is that if they have certain success, then the universe is kind of in a way nudging them to come to realize certain truths about the way that life works. But what may eventually happen is that being that even if they keep doing the same kind of thing and having success with that thing, because it's just for themselves as an ego, eventually they will come unstuck. And so the universe will kind of it teaches us a lesson, right? So that we'll come back into alignment with it. All it really wants is to come back in alignment with it. And it's just a way that if you think of everything like frequency energy, it, the universe has a certain harmony to it, right? Even the word universe, verse, sound, right? And uni means one. So universe is one sound or one song, one vibration. And um, this one vibration, if something gets out of alignment with that one vibration, then it creates some kind of tension there. And then something needs to give. Something's got to give to rectify that, to create that alignment again. So when a being is operating all their life in a state of misalignment because they're operating through the unconsciousness of the ego, sometimes they will get things the way that they want them, other times they will not. And these are both ways of life trying to give a nudge in the direction. Oh yeah, look, see, you can manifest because look, what we're trying to point you to is the fact that there is a deeper power here.
Hmm.
So it gets people onto the path, maybe. So like when we think of like when The Secret came out, right? The law of attraction, The Secret, it was very materialistic based, right? You can manifest a Ferrari, you can manifest this, right? But actually, in many ways, what that will have done is it got people interested in the deeper aspects then. So they started off with that, and it gave them enough experiences to be like, wow, there's something to this. There's something to the universe. There's something more. And it will have led them down a path, some people, to go deeper to where they eventually come into that realization of what they are and come back in alignment with the one true intelligence and then operating from the natural laws of things. To me, there are three fundamental natural laws. The first is Everything is one seamless intelligence, one whole. Everything is the oneness. So it's the law of one. Everything is one. One seamless intelligence that is present here and now, eternal, timeless. The second natural law is that everything everything are changing energy vibrations. So what we call the universe is this constant fluctuation. It's a constant flux and changing of different energy vibrations from one form to another form to another form to another form. And thirdly, that essentially what we give is what we get. What we put out is what comes back. The energy that we put out is essentially what comes back in some way, shape, or form. That doesn't necessarily mean that if I give somebody $20 or £20, that then somebody else is going to give me directly $20 or £20. But in some way, shape, or form, there's a circulation of that energy. Energy gets circulated. It's like when you have the high pressure and the low pressure of the weather, when you get different weather currents. When something has created a void, that void wants to be filled, you know. So when you give something, something will come to fill what you have given because it's a flow, because it's an exchange, right? There's a constant exchange going on.
Mm.
So if we come to see that we are this one true intelligence and we realize that, and if we come to see that everything is changing energy vibrations, um, and if we come to see that what we give is what we get, then all we have to do is align what we are with that. So we align ourselves by realizing we are this one true intelligence. That will then inform the way that we treat so-called other beings and treat life itself and treat the universe. And then if we realize the second law of constantly changing energy vibrations, we will see that actually we're never stuck. In terms of this body-mind organism, we have the ability to transform it constantly. We can shift it to a new state, whatever state we wish. We can shift to a different frequency. And then, because for a lot of people, they don't think that's possible. There are many people that think you can't change. They think everything is just fixed, right? Like that's the old paradigm of science. Is like everything is just fixed. But of course, now we're seeing that that's not the case. The brain can change we've seen that through the field of neuroplasticity. The genetics can change. We've seen that through the field of epigenetics. So everything is malleable and changeable, which means that we can essentially, as a body mind, transform into whatever we wish if we know how to do that. And then the third law, if we align with that, then we obviously recognize that whatever we put out in terms of energy is essentially what is going to come back. I think even in the Bible, does it say, or Jesus said, what you meter out will be metered unto you. It's that's the same principle, same law, essentially. So if we align ourselves with the natural laws of life, then we begin to flow and function in a much more harmonious way. And then manifestation, to answer your question, becomes effortless. Manifestation then is effortless because when a being is aligned with all those natural laws and they know who they are, then the action that will come forth, the impulse that will move through you to a certain action will be coming actually directly from the one intelligence itself, not from an ego. The ego is just full of all of these wants and desires that have been programmed into it by society, by previous generations. And it's based on its sense of lack and separation and not being fulfilled. Whereas a being that has come to realize what they are is coming from a state of wholeness, fullness already being fulfilled. And so now it just follows the impulse of what the universe wants it to. And this is how a being really um, begins to flow with life, right? They flow. They're in that state of flow. And in that state of flow, everything comes effortlessly. It's an effortless state. Whereas the ego is always making effort, right? The ego is like, it's full of effort. It's trying to make this happen and trying to make that happen. It's exerting so much energy. That's the old paradigm of you've got to work hard, right? But actually, when we operate from our true nature, the manifestation, creation becomes very effortless and easy. And it's meant to be effortless and easy because, again, think of, if we go back to the Bible again, look at the lilies. They neither toil nor spin, and yet all is achieved effortlessly, right? So if we look at nature, everything is achieved with effortlessness, with flow. We're not meant to struggle. Only the ego struggles. But in our true nature, being aligned with the natural laws of life, its manifestation becomes effortless. Creation becomes effortless.
Wow, fantastic! It's so awesome. I'm so glad we're having this
It's a
conversation.
beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up with. I'm going to combine my last two questions into one. And I'd love to understand your your thoughts about the external world moving forward. You know, we see at the same time we see the most perilous biblical apocalyptic nature outlined. We see a lot of people um, waking up more than ever, becoming aware not only of evil and the nature of the system, but of these higher spiritual truths, if you will. As well, I've heard you speak about frequency holders and frequency. Hang on, let me check my notes here. Frequency controllers. I was
Hmm.
wondering if maybe we could tie the two together in terms of understanding how you see, things unfolding in the external space, and in terms of the Great Awakening, because I know you've also spoken about the false awakening, false light, not just in soul traps, but around the Great Awakening, and as well this concept of spiritual frequency holders and all that. Yeah, maybe you could
Yes.
paint a picture for us.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we can all feel that we're in a great time of obviously turbulence and transition. There's amazing things going on, and we're at this kind of precipice point. And it seems to me that there is this kind of ancient battle, this kind of fight going on for the direction of humanity and the direction of the human being. And whichever gets to steer the majority of humanity will determine then the kind of society and world that is then created. And and so in that sense, I think things are heating up. This is why we have more events taking place in the world. It could be that many of these things are just purely distraction. Not that they are not happening, they are happening, but that they have been initiated to happen to distract. Because again, when people are focused on what's going on out there, they tend not to be focused on looking at their true nature themselves and also looking at some of the beneficial things that are happening and around them. It's the old magic trick, isn't it? Divert a person's attention to something, right? Get them looking over here while over here maybe something else is going on as well. Um, so it seems to me that there is this kind of sort of battle going on, but this ancient battle of these beings that align more with this dark force, which essentially is the ego. It's an identified state of being separate and limited and needing to to feed off of other people's energy and control because they have lost access to their own true energy because they've fallen out of alignment with the one. Like I said earlier, they've become a demon. A demon is one that has moved away from the one, which is the mono. So, so those beings that have gone completely into the ego, they obviously want to try to control and manipulate others to try to control them to get what they think they need in terms of energy and where they want to see the world and the resources for themselves and all this kind of thing. So I think that's going on many different levels, on a human level, on also an interdimensional level, even an extraterrestrial level. I see all of these things that play together, and there are probably these different levels. They are aligning with each other to try and achieve what they're trying to achieve and push things in the direction that they want to push things in. And then on the other side, you've got, and you could say, oh, by the way, those are what we would call the frequency controllers, to use that term that we said. They're trying to control the frequencies. They're trying to manipulate things and control other people's frequency. And then you got on the other side the frequency holders and these beings that are more conscious and becoming more conscious and moving more towards an organic way of life with nature, more in harmony with nature, um, less reliant on technology, drawing upon their own resources, their own gifts, because on the other side, on this frequency controller side, this darker force, they're trying to move, it seems to me, humanity towards this inorganic way of life, right? The artificial intelligence, the technology, the augmented reality, chips in the brain, all this kind of thing, controlling the food sources, genetically modified foods, and all of this kind of thing. And on the other side, it's this organic way of life. It's aligning again with the natural laws of life, seeing that there is this supreme intelligence in nature that we are one with, that we are, that actually is a superior intelligence. You cannot match that intelligence. Even artificial intelligence cannot match the true intelligence. Of this human body is, as far as we know, in terms of what we know in terms of the universe, is the most sophisticated piece of technology available. What it is able to do and the speed in which it does it is phenomenal. Artificial intelligence, even though it can be fast and efficient in many ways, there is still many limitations to it. It gets to a certain point and it can't go past a certain point. Whereas the human body can continue to keep evolving and evolving and evolving and transforming and transforming. And we have so much, the human being has so much DNA that is not being consciously used. There are abilities within the human being that have not yet been fully accessed. And the danger is that if we go down the route of the technology and putting technology in the body and the chips in the brain, and we're already starting to see it to some degree with people that are constantly fixated on devices, is that these abilities within us begin to atrophy, right? Because we're not using them. It's the old adage, isn't it? If you don't use it, you lose it. And that's what we find when you look at the field of neuroplasticity and epigenetics. The body is so intelligent that it will switch things on if it is being used. So for instance, if we learn a new skill, like learning how to, ride a bike, the neurons in the brain will create new neural pathways to integrate that skill. So the experiences that we have and what we actually do will shape the body to be a certain way. So if we don't practice psychic ability, let's say, then we will lose that ability. If we don't think for ourselves, we will lose that ability. And and this is kind of what's happening is that a lot of the corporations, what they want is they would like people to have a chip in the brain and have constant advertisements and things. This is what part of what they actually want. This is what's been spoken about. To have constant advertisements playing in a person's mind. And what this does is it's like a child where in fact, it's funny, just before we came on this, we've done this together. I'd just been for a walk locally and I saw a group of young lads, probably either early teens or maybe slightly younger. And a lot of them, the trend at the moment is these scooters, these electric little scooters um, that they go around on. And I'm walking up this hill, and they go on the scooter up the hill, this electric scooter, and um, and it just brought to mind what we're saying here, which is that the children today are becoming so reliant on the technology that they're not really thinking for themselves. They're not really using their brain in many ways, and now they're not even using the body and exercising and using it in that way. And again, if they don't use it, they'll lose it. So, and this to me is why it's so powerful when you look at like the ancient mystics, the saints, the sages. What they did is they turned within and they started to access the capacity that they have within them. They started to access these abilities and they began to work with these abilities. And as they work with these abilities, it amplifies them, like building a muscle, right? If you go to the gym, you keep lifting weights, your muscle will get bigger and stronger and stronger and stronger. In the same way, if we work with the abilities that we have, they will increase. But if we go to technology instead, there is a danger that we're going to rely too much on that and that we're going to allow then these things to atrophy within ourselves. And we might lose what it means to be human before we've even discovered it, which would be to me a tremendous tragedy. So I think we're at this point where there's this kind of fight, this battle going on. And, I think that there is many attacks from, you could say, the darker side to try and impair and restrict um, the beings that are operating more from the conscious and moving in this organic direction. But to me, it's a kind of race. There's a race to who is going to sort of steer the future and direction of humanity. Do we go down the technology, the inorganic route, governed by artificial intelligence, a centralized system, a contracted, more controlling system? Or do we end up going down this other path of a more conscious world, of more freedom, organic, working with nature, still using technology, but using technology in a secondary way to just to simply amplify our true gifts and abilities and amplify what we can do with nature rather than take over, what we are doing. So to me, this is how I kind of see things playing out. And I think, it seems that 2030 is a very pivotal um, time period. And I think the darker force understands that. And it seems to be a kind of race towards this time period, So everyone must do, I guess, what they feel is their part to play in this to the best of their ability.
Hmm.
But I think it's important as well from the deepest level to again realize that this is a play that's happening and to not get too attached to what is happening. Don't fear what is happening. Don't fear what is taking place. See it as a great unfolding that has the potential to um, create a greater evolution of the human being and act as a catalyst for a being to awaken deeper to their true nature, which is ultimately not the circumstances of this world and not the body and not the mind. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, very well said. And in my own life, I made the decision a few years ago to be out close to nature, living what I call a more human life. And yeah, I feel like it just was the best decision I ever made. And the people I meet out here are much more grounded to the earth. Farmers are a lot more grounded in reality,
Mm.
because of having to be engaged with living animals and seeing the cycle of birth and death constantly and living off of the land. It's a very, yeah, grounding human, it's a really blessed thing. And, all the people we see are doing really well. And then contrast that with my friends in the cities, they're seeing the insanity of it, right? They're seeing crime keeps going up and their jobs are becoming more automated in AI, and they're almost having to compete with robots that are, and so yeah, it really does feel like this fork in the road. And ultimately it is a choice. And I think even in a city you can live a more, human life, but it's challenging as well, I think. So yeah, I do
Yeah.
see that as well. I call it the forkening. It seems like there is this fork in the road. Do you want to eat the bugs? Do you want to live in the pod? Do you want to be in the VR headset, or do you want to live a real life?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. This is it. And because we've not even truly discovered the true intelligence of life itself and the universe and what we essentially are, and even the true capacities of this body. And it would be such, I think, a tragedy for humanity to miss that, before it's even, and then go off in the direction of the technology and not see that there is tremendous beauty and potential and intelligence already here, you know. So we shall see what happens.
Yeah, it's exciting nonetheless. And I love how you said you gotta kind of disconnect emotionally from it. But yeah, Christopher, I want to thank you very much for coming on the stream today. Where can people find you and support you?
Yeah, good to be with you, Donny, today. I appreciate it. Yes, I am on YouTube at CJ Smith and in brackets Fulfilled Living. You can find me on Facebook at Christopher J. Smith, and the website is christopherjsmith.com.
Okay, great. Well, wow, a lot to think about. I want to thank everybody who is on the live stream here. Please support Christopher's work. Fantastic. Every video I watch is just pure gold. I can't get enough of it. And as well, he does a lot of retreats, so I would recommend checking it out on his website and checking out his book as well on Amazon. Great. Well, yeah, I'm going to close down the stream, guys. Thanks everyone for hopping on. And yeah, I'll join you on the other side here, Christopher, to say my goodbyes.